it's tough when you're the guy 10 years ago who thinks he's got it all under control and has all the answers. That surrendering was crippling to think about. And it took me 10 years to get there. So little baby steps, fallbacks, baby steps up, fallbacks, baby steps up, until you get to that point where you feel comfortable surrendering and saying, God, I don't have all the answers. Show me your plan for my life. And that gets exciting.
Mark Kessler has lived a big life, full of big success and big hurt, with big lessons. He's a remarkable person. I know this because he's one of my closest lifelong friends. Today, we accept the challenge of two close friends openly discussing his powerful story and the presence of God through it all. Welcome to A Stronger Faith, a podcast for people who question, wonder, and seek to understand. I'm your host, Stacy McCants, and we pray that God uses this conversation to move you toward Him and shine a light in places you need it. Today is unique and a bit of a challenge as I interview one of my best friends as he reveals God's intricate path of progression into His very core. Meet my friend, Mark Kessler. Mark Kessler, one of my best friends in the world. I've not necessarily done an interview with a close friend, so I think this will be a challenge a little bit for me. That's a little bit different, and maybe for you as well. I don't know. At the same time, I'm excited about it. I'm looking forward to us sort of opening up some of these things that have gone on with you and what your faith has looked like. We've had a lot of fun together over the years. Friends in college, knew each other before college, and
met you at the state championship tennis tournament, as I recall.
Back in when my tennis career was beginning and ending as far as playing really goes. So yours was just taking off. But, I call you one of my best friends in the world. But when I look at you and just all I've known and all the time I've spent with you, there's probably somewhere between, and I'm ballparking, and I don't feel like I'm overestimating this, 500 or so people that I would just ballpark that probably say the same thing about you. That Mark Kessler is one of my very best friends. And so you and Brent and I talked about this this morning, and I talk about with anybody that I share about this guy that I know that's one of my closest friends named Mark Kessler. You don't not go. You're there, and you've always been there, and you've always been connected, and you got a million friends, you got a million connections, you've always been successful, you worked hard, you are the light in the room everywhere you go, and I've tried to emulate that to whatever degree I have that in me. Now, I'm not you, and we are different in lots of those ways, but I always try to get a little bit more like that, because sometimes life passes you by when you don't go.
Yeah.
And I think you're going to get to the end.
Yeah.
And you're going to have like zero regrets because you did everything. You played every golf course. You met every person. You shook every hand. You did a selfie with every celebrity that you saw. Those are we could do a whole episode on some of the experiences we've had together in that way. But
well, that's a huge compliment coming from you. I appreciate that.
Well, but it sort of begs the question for me, and I guess it's probably my first question is, did you have a life philosophy that you said, this is how I'm going to live my life, regardless?
Yeah.
That led you to be that way?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think it was just, I grew up in a household with a great family, had a sister, mother and father, and they just were joyful people. And we embraced life. We embraced whatever life had to offer. And so my mom was always encouraging us for new experiences and new relationships. And I grew up, the majority of my social interaction growing up was school, church, and the club. And I was a tennis player, but also swam and played golf. And so I really spent a lot of time at that place that had all that, and then it had just a ton of people there. So I was constantly surrounded by people. And you knew my dad very well, and my dad was the vice president of University of Alabama Human Resources, so he dealt with people all the time. And I thought it was amazing as a kid going with him across there's this place called, it's a huge grassy area in our hometown. It was called the Quad. And as it's right in the center of the University of Alabama, as we would walk across there together as a 8, 9, 10-year-old kid, he would talk to so many people along the way as we're walking through there, and would know them by name, would know their backstory. And that was just something I think that was embedded in me young as a young kid, and turning into a 13-year-old and becoming a man, that I wanted to. Everybody's got a great story. You just got to ask them questions and find out what they're like. And it's amazing to me as you talk to people what their story is. And that's just something I think that my mom and dad brought me up, teaching me along the way.
I always believe that those kinds of things are given to you to build you into the person that you need to be going forward.
Yeah.
Both in your own life and sort of how God's shaping you to be for His kingdom ultimately,
Yep.
right?
Exactly right.
And when I think back on all those things, and we were friends, and I remember needing to make a professional transition myself, and talking to you, and you recruited me, but then to this company. But then you were hands off. It's like, hey, look, this is all, you got to do this on your own. I cannot be a part of this, and that sort of thing. And I got the job, which was great. But when I got the job, I was young and learning and that sort of thing. But you were already in like a major leadership role. And I remember us going to conferences and things like that. And I was scared to put one foot in front of the other. And I look up and like, you're on stage and leading and teaching and all these other things. And I just remember admiring your leadership.
Well, thank you.
And your leadership from a pretty early age. But it was leadership with compassion, and it was never ever leadership in sort of a dictatorial fashion, and in any kind of way. And it was Christ leadership. And I don't know if you knew it at the time.
I didn't know it at the time.
But that's what you did, and that's why people were so attracted to being around you and participating with you. And you're just very successful, and those are things that I don't forget. And I remember seeing you on a stage one time doing a presentation, and there's probably 150 people in the crowd, and they're all senior level executives and all suited up and all that stuff. I was like in the back, so proud of my buddy doing these things that just stretched you into a new person every day. And you didn't bat an eye with that stuff. I mean,
Well, to your question, your point earlier, yes, it was a Christ thing. It was a God thing. But, I think that everybody has their faith journey, and mine at that time, that's going back, let's call it 25 years ago. Can't believe it's been that long. But I would say that my faith was at a 2 at the time. It was there, but it wasn't. I was believing in, but I wasn't walking with, which are two different things. Believing in Christ, but not walking with Him every day. And at that point in time, my life was all about success. And I listened to a lot more Anthony Robbins than I read the Bible at the time.
Yeah.
And so it was all about success and pushing myself to do things. But that guy on stage was very scared and that was not my comfort zone. But I kept on pushing myself outside that comfort zone. And you mentioned about leadership. I believe that, and I learned this from our podcast roadie's father, that leadership is really believing in other people and trying to help them find their calling and help them be successful. And if, as a leader, if you humble yourself and just try and help everybody around you be successful, you're going to be successful because they see it, they want to help you out. But that's what leadership is. It's very easy.
Yeah, and when you read the New Testament, if you looked at the way Jesus navigated what He did, and if you just analyzed it from purely a leadership lessons perspective, that's really kind of what He did.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It was about giving people the tools to be the best version of themselves that they could be.
Yep. And he sees things in us that we don't see. And I think that, look, from a leadership perspective, going back to the business days, I think my EQ is very high. My IQ is probably like a 12. So I'm not very smart. But my EQ is really high, and knowing what makes people tick, but asking those questions about what your hopes and dreams are and tailoring a program or a compensation plan or a time off plan around that, and making it's management couture. You treat everybody differently based on how they are. But if you don't get to know them, you can't do that. Very similar to our relationship with Christ and our relationship with God. If we don't open ourselves up and let him know who we truly are, he knows who we are. But if we don't be vulnerable in his presence and let him know who we are, then he can't help us with our hopes and dreams and what we're trying to accomplish and what we want for our families and what we want for our work and so forth. But he came to walk amongst the human race so that he could pour into people and he could help people. But I think now our journey is being vulnerable in him and leaning into him and telling him what we want, what we don't like, just being true, having a conversation with Jesus, just like you and I are having right now.
Yeah,
which is hard to do.
It is, but I think about where you were in those days. I think a great benefit of this conversation is the fact that I was there and saw much of the events that have taken place in your life, and so I got to ask these questions a little bit as if I wasn't, but I can ask probably some richer questions because I was, and so I'm probably going to do that. So just be warned.
Are you lay down on the couch or something?
I don't think so. But when I remember that guy, and I think that guy is still in you for sure, I felt like you had elevated aspirations.
Mm-hmm. No doubt.
More than what you find in average people.
Yeah.
Right. You were driven to be successful.
Yeah.
Back in those days, gosh, we were young, right?
Right.
And it's
we were in our 20s, right? Late 20s, early 30s, right?
Yeah, that's right. And that's expected. That's how life goes. I don't think our aspirations were to be as faithful to God as possible. I think we were in a place where we were trying to be as successful as we could.
Right, exactly right.
The marker of which is financial success and
having the nice car, being a part of the club, whatever.
All that stuff.
Yeah.
That's right. Which creates
idolatry. It's idolatry.
Idolatry. Yeah, exactly, right? Idolatry is when we place something that's not God in the place of God, above God. What were yours?
Well, okay, so I think you had two questions there. The first question is what drove me to that, right?
Yep.
And I haven't. So it's funny getting ready for this podcast, and I had to give a speech earlier this week. I really did a deep reflection on literally my last 54 years, and I think a lot of that was driven. My mom and dad got a divorce when I was in second grade, and I think a lot of that was driven because I wanted to impress my dad, and it wasn't that he didn't care about all that stuff, but it was something that I wanted to show him that I could do this on my own. And I think that drove me, but I think also during that time of, let's say, when Dad and Mom split up, my church became the tennis court and the club, and that church was that 72 by 46 foot rectangle. I think that was my group therapy. That was where I took out all my anxiety. That's where anything was going wrong, I took to the tennis court. And a lot of my male figures in my life at the time were my coaches or the people that were around me or in the tennis circuit and whatnot. But during that time, I learned, and being at the church of, what would be the First United Methodist Church of the tennis court, I really realized that the harder I worked, the more successful I got. The harder I worked, the more successful I got. And so that became who I was. And what I learned along the journey, and we'll get into this a little bit later, I'm sure, but I learned that it was never enough. No matter how much success I got, it was never enough. And so my idolatry became all those things that you mentioned: having a nice car, having a nice house, being able to afford nice trips and all that kind of stuff. And, all that stuff is great, but it has its place. And at that time of my 20s and 30s, I was really lost in that. And that was who I thought that I was. I had to have that and show people I had it for my own self-worth. And as I look back at my faith journey, God was trying to intervene several times. Failed ventures, things didn't go right personally, and he was calling me to a relationship with him, and I was giving him the Heisman. For those people who know the Heisman, I was pushing him back and wanting to solve the problem myself.
Yeah, we just dig in a little bit deeper, right? We just get tougher and
exactly.
we work harder, right?
Yep, exactly right. I mean, we think that we can solve any problem, right? And then you get thrown life curveballs that no matter how hard you work, no matter how smart you are, no matter how high your EQ is, you can't solve those problems. And that's when you get to your breaking point, and God is yelling at you, hey, I'm still here. You've been pushing me away for a long time. Now's the time that we need to start talking again.
Christians use the term surrender a lot.
It's tough.
Yeah. Well, so much so that I think people, even Christians, get to where they're like eye rolling, right? It's like a Jesus-y word or whatever, and it's sometimes hard to like listen to that.
Yeah.
And
especially as men.
Well, just hearing the word, I think, is one thing, but then the thought of not. It's almost like you're being irresponsible if you just like give up on something and say, I can't do it.
Right.
It's counterintuitive the way we're hardwired, I think, in some cases.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's the point. But surrendering, people also don't necessarily understand what that means.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I think we get to a place where we get into a position where we realize that we can't fix it. We can't just work harder and get to the other side of this.
Yep.
Or we can't just dig in or go get the therapy or go do whatever it is and take control of it of ourselves. And that we have to get to a point where we acknowledge that we can't do it. It's a step, and it's the point of, I think, of recovery programs, right? Is first of all recognizing that you have the problem, realizing, secondly, that you can't solve it.
Yep.
And then thirdly, there's someone who can, and I'm going to let them.
Yep.
And that is hard.
It is hard.
And when these things happened, these challenges that happened in your life, did you dig in and work harder?
Mm-hmm.
When did you get to a point? Was it much, much later in life that you said, all right, now it's too much?
Yeah. And I don't like the word surrender as well. It challenges my manhood.
Yeah.
We're not supposed to surrender. We're supposed to fix things, right? And so I like the term better partnering up with. And so, God wants what's on your heart. He made us in His creation. He made us to be a certain way. He gave me these skills that I have to lead teams and to be, I've got a good business mind. He gave us those talents, and He wants us to be successful with those talents He's given, but He also wants to partner with us and use that to bring people closer to Him ultimately. And I love the term partner with, because I partnered with people my whole life. I mean, I partnered with you because you had skills that I didn't have, and I needed you on the team because you brought a whole fresh perspective, new work ethic, and that's what I've done my whole life. Doing an inventory of what you're good at and what you're not good at, and bringing people into your life that are better than you at those things that are your Achilles heel. And when you say surrender means that I'm just gonna throw caution to the wind and give it up to God, and God will fix everything. That's not what I like partnering with, because when I've gone through the worst times of my life, I've partnered with God, and He has carried me when I need to be carried, and He's directed me when I need to be directed. And it's been, looking at it through that kind of lens is a different lens to look at your faith journey But the second question you asked was going back to the idolatry years. I felt like God again was calling me to a relationship with Him, but I kept on saying, I've got this. I'm good. And I just kept on doing what I was doing, and again trying to go up that ladder of success. And the next ladder, and the next ladder, and you make the VP, and then you want to get the C-suite, and then after that you want to own your own company, and after that you want to buy the Atlanta Falcons. I mean, it's never ending. I want to have the great car. I want a different car. I want a better car. I want a better house. I want all these kind of things. And as I was going through that journey, God kept calling me back to Him, and I was pushing Him away. And then I was in such a pursuit of financial success that I made the brilliant decision in 2007 to partner with two friends and buy 2 acres of land. If you know Atlanta, it's right in the heart of downtown Centennial Olympic Park, which is where they had the Olympics. There was a brand new aquarium, the world's largest aquarium, that was put in, and the 7th largest expo center in the United States for conventions. And we'd bought 2 acres of land right in between all that, and had decided that we were going to build a Hard Rock hotel. And we met with the Hard Rock CEO, and I'd met with a lot of celebrities in town, and that was feeding that ego and that idolatry. And throughout that process, God brought me to my knees, and I'm going to repeat the date again. It was 2007. So that's how brilliant I was, because 2008, what happened? The financial world came to an end, and I was left holding this property that the bank said was worth millions of dollars more than what we owed on it. And so we started using that equity to do the architectural plans and negotiate the contract and all this kind of stuff. And then when the financial crisis happened, the bank called us and said, remember that piece of property that you had that was valued over $10 million? Well, now it's only worth $1 million, and you owe us $8 million, and we need that in 30 days. That's a problem you can't out hustle. You can't outwork. And God was calling me back to Him, and that I did surrender during that time, because that was not a partnering with, that was a surrendering.
Yeah, because when you describe a partnership, I think of a person who is having a heart attack, and they wheel them into the sort of room where they save their life, essentially.
Yep.
I'm going to tell you, the guy laying on that table isn't partnering with the doctor.
No.
He's laying on the table saying, I'm going to die unless you do something.
Right.
And there's nothing I can do.
Yep.
I'm either going to die or you're going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
That, to me, is sort of a more synonymous of surrender.
Absolutely.
You have no choice.
Yep.
There's nothing you can do.
Yep.
They're the only ones that can do it. And, I've talked about it on this podcast before, there's several places in Scripture where the same sort of thing happened, right? You've got the Exodus. They were backed up to the Red Sea. There was no way out, and the Egyptian army is bearing down on them. So there's nothing that the Israelites could do.
Right.
Nothing.
Mm-hmm.
They were dead right there.
Yep.
Unless God does something like suspend them in the air and take them across the sea,
right,
they're dead.
Right.
There was no partnership there.
Mm-hmm. No.
He literally had to part the sea.
Yep.
Something
Exactly.
like that had to happen.
Yep.
And there's stuff like that all through Scripture. When you think of sort of Daniel in the lion's den, or the guys thrown in the furnace, or whatever. I mean, you're getting thrown in the furnace.
Yeah.
You are dying.
Yep.
That's how it works, unless God shows up in this way. So
I think that partnership was just my Christian neophyte way of allowing me to still have some type of control.
That's right.
And allowing Him, and look, a relationship is a journey in itself, right? And so the relationship with Christ is an ongoing relationship. It just doesn't, some people it happens overnight, and you just like, okay, there was a burning bush, there was an image, there was, the clouds parted, whatever it was. And I'm now all in. I've totally surrendered. For me, it was a long journey of me not having all the answers and inviting God in to my relationship more and more and deeper.
There's a
deeper.
step.
Everything, every life issue was a step for me. Exactly.
Yeah.
And that Hard Rock was not the beginning of my life issue.
Yeah. So rewinding here, I mean, because where did faith start for you?
Great question. So, I grew up in a great household. My mom, my dad, we were very active in First United Methodist Church. I remember going to, my dad's church basketball games and softball games, and he was on the leadership team at the church, and we would go to the Wednesday night suppers and all that kind of stuff. But we were Sunday Christians. I mean, and I don't mean that in a negative way. It's just like church was not, God and our relationship with Christ was not something we talked about on a daily basis.
Yeah.
But I was given that fundamental basis of what that looks like, and I really give my parents a lot of credit for bringing us into our faith journey. As we developed, I can remember being 13 and was adamant that I had to be there. I think it was 15 weeks in a row. I had to be there 15 weeks to go through confirmation class. And that was really, I think, the first time that I took a stand and said, this is important to me. And then after that, as we get older and get our teenage years, there was a break, a separation of, again, this faith journey is a journey. And during that time of teenage years, being, the tennis player and being an athlete, and then hormones and girlfriends and, all that kind of stuff, it just took a back seat. And then in college, the same thing. I played college tennis, and God parachuted people in my lives to help me along that journey. A teammate of mine, Matt Hewitt, a guy that I haven't talked to in about 30 years named Dave Stalling, who is a Fellowship of Christian Athletes, who I probably met with, 10 times, but it made a profound impact on my rebirth into my faith. But God kept parachuting people like that in my lives along that journey. But it started back in my household, and my dad even toyed with being a priest at one point in time.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know if you knew that or not, but early on, before kids, like when him and mom had just gotten married, he was in the military, and that was one of the things he was actually deeply considering.
So your story of being involved in church early on, but mostly a Sunday type of experience, and then you grow up, you get into high school and you get into college, and you go off and explore life and do lots of things. That's not an uncommon story, right? I think that probably fits me pretty well.
Yep.
And a lot of people can understand and relate to that. But things happen that bring you into a place where you have to sort of confront whether the faith that you knew as a child was a sort of made-up fairy tale thing versus was it real?
Yeah.
Is God real?
Mm-hmm.
Something has to happen, typically, to get people into a place of a real faith or more mature faith. Or when did that happen for you?
I would say several years after college. I'd say probably 6 or 7 years. I'd started a business in college, really small business. I say I sold it, but I basically gave it away once I got out of college and finished my master's. Found myself, and as God would have it, in Tuscaloosa, and because of my parents' journey and because of their divorce, I just had vowed never to get married again. Dad was on his fourth marriage at the time, and then my mom had been divorced twice at the time, and I was like, I don't see the point. And,
you vowed not to get married?
I vowed never to get married. Yes, I was never going to get married, and my dad always joked because. The podcast listeners on here will get a kick out of this. Stacy McCants and I used to teach little bitty kids tennis. We taught tiny tots, and I loved tiny tots. I loved those little kids. And my dad said, "Listen, I know you never want to get married, but you got to have kids." And I was like, "How does that work?" So it was in the cards for me actually to adopt a kid at some point in time, and so then I walked into this restaurant. I was coming into a meeting in Tuscaloosa and walked into this restaurant and met a girl that changed my world. And that encounter, I think, ignited the beginning of a faith journey. And I didn't know it at the time. Right at the time, I saw this beautiful woman that I wanted to be around all the time, and I wanted to share life experiences with. but I didn't see it as a monumental move in my faith. And she didn't either. I think she was in the same faith journey that I was at the time. We were probably, both Sunday Christians at the time. I'd say our faith both was a 2 or a 3 on a scale of 1 to 10 at the time. But that relationship catapulted us together as we dated and then decided to get married. And then we met with our pastor, Charlie Durham, and that it just started begging some questions that I had. And it started, and that's how your faith starts, is asking questions and really diving into the Bible, diving into a small group, having a relationship with your pastor, but also as a couple starting to ask those questions together and say, what is this relationship with God mean in our relationship? And somebody told me one time, a marriage is a threesome. It's you and your wife and God. And the deeper you invite God in that relationship, the better it's going to be. And Stacy and I kind of embarked on that journey as we dated, but ultimately when we got married, we dove deeper and deeper. Then we moved to Atlanta and had 3 or 4 different people who didn't know each other said, listen, you need to go to this church. It's a perfect church for you. It's a rock and roll church. I guess that says a lot about my personality, but we ended up in Andy Stanley's church, and that was another logarithmic shift in my journey. Just the messages that he spoke were just piercing my heart at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it got a little more real. This is, you kind of skimmed over a really important piece of everything, and that was you meeting Stacy. So my name is Stacy. We've been friends, but your wife's name.
It wasn't you.
No, it wasn't. But you met Stacy, and I knew. In fact, I think I was with you.
Mm-hmm. You were
when you met her.
Yep.
And I knew you pretty well back then.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember you guys meeting and sort of the aftermath of that meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I don't know what just happened to Mark, but
Yeah.
he's changed.
Yeah.
I'd never known you to be in love.
Right. No, I had never been.
This wasn't one of those things that took a while either. This was almost, from my observation of your perspective.
Yep.
Now I don't know about hers.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know her except through you at that time. But you fell in love.
Absolutely.
And I mean hard.
Smitten. Yeah. I mean, my world was rocked, so much so that I was working in Birmingham at the time, which is about 60 miles away from where she lived, where she was at Tuscaloosa. She was finishing up school at University of Alabama. And I figured out a way, well, as God would have it, I didn't figure out a way. Our podcast roadie's dad offered me a job because I sold him his travel contract at the time. And that was a door that opened, allowed me to get back to Tuscaloosa, which I wanted to do so I could be closer to Stacy. So, it's so funny how we were talking about this last night, how our success journey kind of had a mind of its own. And I think if I'd invited God into my life at a 10 rather than a 2 earlier on, my life trajectory would have been a lot different and it would have been more purposeful. But I would have never met Stacy. I would have never, ended up getting this job with this great company in Tuscaloosa. And that door opening allowed me to be closer to her, and we ultimately that fairy tale started to take off at the time.
You touched on it a little bit earlier. You got into some of the first pieces of adversity. You talked about getting into some sort of big time commercial real estate deals.
Yeah.
And, a collapse of that causing you to really be in a pretty introspective state, right?
Yeah.
Where what's going on here? I can't do anything about this. I'm in deep trouble. Now I'm in trouble, God. Now you got to do something, right?
Right.
That sort of thing. So that's not the only adversity that started to creep in. You feel like, I look at you and you're driven for success. You are successful. You're successful in anything that you did. And you keep saying that God, you felt like he was tugging you toward relationship with him, which, by the way, he does all the time.
Right.
It's always his pursuit of us, not
Yep.
our pursuit of him.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like we make some discovery and we discover God.
Right.
He's been like screaming at you the whole time.
Yeah.
And it's just a matter of whether we decide we're going to listen and open that door or not. I
Yeah.
stand at the door and knock, waiting for you to open it, really. And when we open it, that's when good things and joy
Yeah.
really begins to pour in. But lots of times that takes adversity. Most of the time that takes suffering. And I don't know that we're dealt suffering to get us back to God, but I believe a lot of times suffering occurs, and one of the byproducts of that is us opening our eyes a little bit more to what's real and what we need. How did adversity begin to, I know because I was there and I saw it, but how did adversity begin to affect you?
Wow. So I heard somebody say one time that pain is the gift that no one wants. I've also heard people say that God is more concerned with the development of our character than he is our comfort. And it's very hard as you go through life issues that are extremely traumatic, where you lose a loved one, or, that are just, that really that's the main thing. But it's hard when you go through those things to keep that perspective. But if you have a lens of eternity and you realize that this life that we're living is one speck of sand on the beaches of eternity, then it changes your perspective. And that's really, I've struggled that with my whole life. I still struggle with that now, but it changes your perspective on, what's really important. But, throughout that time of the hard rock years, I go back to idolatry, is that I can remember sitting in this exact same room telling my wife that I was going to be this great real estate developer, and I admired these real estate developers. They were just in the news all the time, and, it's total idolatry. I mean, I didn't know the first thing about building a building. I did not know the first thing, but I had this cooked up in my head that I could do it. And I just look back at that time and just go, how really lost I was in being successful. And the God was calling me into a relationship. So, when the bank calls you and says you owe $8 million and we need it in 30 days, your life changes. And during that time, that's when I really hit my knees, surrendered, say, God, I can't outwork this problem. I cannot solve this equation. I need you to show up. And my beautiful wife, I came to Stacy and I said, we may lose our house. We may lose all our cars. We may lose everything. That's how dark it was. And her famous comment was, well, it's just stuff. They can't eat us. and that having a partner like that who is just, says that, hey, no worries. I just want us to be a family. And she didn't really care about all that stuff. She just wanted us to be a family. And as I look back at that time, I was robbing my time with my family, because creating this second career on top of my existing career as a technology C-suite leader, putting that on top of that, the only time I could work on it was late nights and weekends or lunch breaks. And so I took that time, that extra time I had for my family, and just filled it for more success.
Did you ever get to a place in that time that when she says a thing like that,
yeah,
part of me says, okay, thankfully I don't have the pressure of my wife saying, well, you got to make this happen because we have a certain standard that we have to live to.
Right.
But another part of me says, you know what? It is just stuff.
Right. Exactly.
What am I doing?
Right. Absolutely.
Why is that so important?
Well, it wasn't until it got to that point. And by the way, the Hard Rock wasn't the only thing I had. I had invested in 10 other properties. And so, I was just tending to fires, and the technology company was taking off. I can remember being in very important presentation meetings and getting calls from banks. That was the 2008 syndrome. And that was probably my biggest time of spiritual awakening, because I couldn't solve that problem. I couldn't outwork that problem. Yeah, Stacy's saying they can't eat us really gave me some freedom to say that everything's going to be okay. And, we may lose the house, we may lose the cars, we may lose everything. We might be, looked at this big failure in our neighborhood and our community, but we were all going to be together. And at that point in time, you really start to realize what's most important.
Well, that's the question that would come to mind, because I would imagine during this time, you're on the road constantly.
Oh, yeah.
How much time are you spending with your family, with your children?
Yeah. So I would parachute in for weekends.
Yeah.
And, when I wasn't working on my technology company, I was working on the Hard Rock. And so as I look back at this time, though, I was coaching T-ball, and I was present at important moments, but not here all the time. Even though I was in the living room with the kids and they're playing, I had my laptop open and I was trying to, push things forward and tend to things that need to be tended to. But yeah, I'll tell you one quick story, and this is how I tried to jam so much into my day. Is there was one day where I had to work until 5 or 6 o'clock on the technology company, and then I had the Hard Rock CEO in town, and we went and walked the site, went to dinner that night. I had to be in Des Moines, Iowa the next morning for a meeting at 9 a.m. The only way I could figure out how to make all that work was to have the dinner with him. There was a late night flight that got me into Chicago that left at 11 o'clock Eastern, got me into Chicago because the time changed around 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning, rented a car, and my brilliant plan was I was going to drive all night and just have 2 hours of sleep like in the car before the presentation, had my suit on, was ready to go. That was the kind of decisions I was making. Midway along that journey from Chicago to Des Moines, had Diet Mountain Dew, chewing gum, windows rolled down, singing songs, trying to stay awake. A deer came out in front of me, and I hit him going 75 miles an hour. The deer disintegrated, and airbags deployed, rental car was totaled. And as I look back at that now, that was God trying to say, hey, dude, come on, seriously? What are you doing? But again, I was on a mission. That was before the 2008 downturn. That was before the financial crisis. So we were still coming out of the ground with this structure. But that was the time, as I look back, where he was trying to call me back to him.
Did you make the meeting?
I did.
Yeah.
I had the wrecker came and took the car. I got the wrecker service to take me to a truck stop, and then I got a taxi. But that was before Uber. I got a taxi, called a taxi company. They picked me up and drove me the last 100 miles to Des Moines. Pulled in, had 20 minutes of sleep, and then went right into the meeting.
So, in the moment, you're not thinking, maybe this is God trying to bring me back into relationship with Him. These are just obstacles that are in the way of success that is going to be a great story when you get back to the office.
Yeah.
To show your own ability to persevere and to overcome and to make the deal happen anyway.
Exactly right. Yeah, exactly right.
So nothing's changing.
Nothing's changing. I'm still going full. Well, I'll back up and I'll say, yes, God was inviting me in relationship with Him, not just through the deer disintegration, but also the other my relationship in my church, and Andy Stanley's messages were just piercing my heart at the time. And I would say that before the downturn, that was teaching me what a relationship was with God like. And then when the downturn happened, that tenderized my heart. So I was like, okay, I know what that relationship is. I've heard in church, I've heard a lot of examples of that, and I knew what that looked like. And so when I didn't have all the answers after 2008 downturn, that allowed me to open up and surrender a lot more.
Well, your adversity did not remain in the financial realm.
No, it did not. Yeah. So that was 2008. We had three, and I look back at the time, we had three great kids. My oldest, Allie Grace, at the time was probably 5. My middle child, Kate Elise, was 3, and Marcus Jr. was 1. Had a great family, nice house. Great house, great location in Atlanta, and life was if you strip all that morass that I created away, life was great. And as I look back in that time now, I wish I'd pay anything to go back to that time. I look at pictures now of those kids at that stage, and I would just go back in a second and do things totally different.
Yeah.
But that was 2008. 2009, we're pregnant with our fourth child, which was a little bit of an oopsie. But we're at the beach, and Stacy said, she's 9 months pregnant. She says, I don't feel right, and I haven't felt the baby move in about 24 hours. Long story short, went to the hospital. Doctor came in and said, there's no heartbeat. And I was like, oh my, our world was shattered. And the baby's name was Jacob Joseph, and that was on June 3rd. The words the doctor said to me afterwards, I said, okay, well, what do we do? After we picked ourselves off the floor, I said, what do we do? She goes, we have to induce labor. You're going to give birth to this dead baby. I was like, oh my God, how do you do that? So anyway, that was what Stacy and I had to do that day, and family, friends came in, sent text. It just covered up us with love during that time, and it just made me realize. And I think Stacy said the comment several times. What we learned throughout that experience is that life is precious and life is very fragile, and there's no given that we have 80, 90, 100 years on this planet. And it's just, life is precious. Every day is precious. And that was a very difficult time for us, but it brought me and Stacy closer together as a family. It brought us in a deeper relationship with our faith, which I think is interesting because I think a lot of people, it would have destroyed them. And for us, it didn't. It brought us closer together. And I don't know the reason for that, except for Stacy had such a deep faith that the other alternative was not even on the table. It wasn't an option. And because of that really brought us closer to God and closer to each other as a couple.
When you say your faith got stronger, your marriage got stronger, what became different from that point on that maybe wasn't in place before?
Well, I mean, I just almost lost. Well, I was still battling losing everything financially. And so that by the way, took about 2 or 3 years to resolve. But during that time, I've been brought to my knees and knew I didn't have all the answers. And Jacob Joseph dies, and I really don't have all the answers. And so I think it was just a process for me being grateful for the blessings that I had in my life. A great wife, unbelievable 3 kids, a great family, mom, dad, sister, cousins everywhere. And just the deep relationship that we had with our family and our friends network. It was a reshifting of priorities for sure. And that reshifting, I had a dear friend come into my house one time, and I had my goals up on the wall, and Brent Huddle looked at those and said, "Oh, that's funny. That'll change at some point in time." I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, you got all your success and financial goals at the top, and you got your faith at the bottom. At some point in time, that will flip." And I was like, whatever. That was probably 2003 or 4. And sure enough, that's being rocked to my core with those 2 situations really flipped my priorities. And, my friends, family, faith became utmost priority.
So what happened next?
So that throughout the rest of that year, me and my partners were trying to solve the financial equation still. God was so ever present during that time, because the one thing that I could not do is lose my job. So I had to pour myself a little bit more back into my job. And at the time, I was working 50, 60 hours a week anyway, but I had to be, I could not lose that. If I lost that, that's the last domino that fell. And so I had to spend more time on that in order to tend the financial issues that we were dealing with the property development side. And having that reshift in priorities really brought me to be more present in the kids' lives, in my wife's, my relationship with my wife, our church. We came back in decided at that time we were going to do several things. We wanted to get in a small group, which we did. That was just a blessing. Just some really godly people shepherded us through the Hard Rock years, and then Jacob Joseph's passing, and then we started leading small groups, which I'd never thought that I would be able to lead a small group. And so we led small groups, and I just became, I wasn't reading the Bible, like I should have during that time, but I was listening to the messages, and I was getting closer in my faith. And then in 2010, another banner year, my dad, best friend, Dad and I played tennis our whole life together. The coolest thing I ever did, one of the coolest things I ever did for my tennis career was Dad and I won the city, state, and the southeast of the United States father-son division in 1984 when I was an 18-year-old senior, and were invited to compete in the U.S. Open. And so, as you can imagine, 18-year-old, my locker was 2 down from Connors, right around the corner from Yvonne Lindell. McEnroe's was across the way, and in between all the matches, I lived in the locker room. But it was just a really cool experience to have with your dad to go through that. And we got all the way to the finals and lost 7-6 in the third set in the finals. But to this day, that's one of my fondest memories of me and my dad being able to do something really cool together. And he was my best friend. He was the best man at my wedding, and then he called me one day and said, "Hey, I've got some bad news. I was diagnosed with a melanoma. We don't know how bad it is, but we're going in and we're going to have it biopsied." And then I got another call a couple weeks later, said it's pretty bad. And it was metastatic melanoma, which means that it's spread to other parts of your body. And so again, being the guy that's going to solve the problem, I decided to research every experimental process out there, get him in the best care. He probably wouldn't have done all this if it hadn't been for me, and maybe would have had a better last couple years of his life. But flew him to MD Anderson and got him on an experimental drug there, and then we went to Nashville, and I was trying to solve the problem again, and it was a problem I couldn't solve. And in 2012, he passed away.
That was a hard time for you.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
That was a real hard time for you. I saw you in a place that I hadn't seen you before.
Yeah. And I think that during that time it was very hard because he was, even though he wasn't living in the house with us, he was the guy that I looked up to. He was the guy that I brought my success to and told him, "Look what I did." And he was my biggest fan. And I guess now that I look back on it, I haven't thought about this until now, but I guess that was stripping away of that need for success again, because he wasn't there to show him what I did. And a lot of us have lost people with cancer or some other issue, and after going through this, I have come to the realization, right, wrong, or indifferent, that God does not create cancer. God doesn't want to take our loved ones from us. We're from a fallen world and have so many factors from that fallen world of production and manufacturing and hormones in food and all this kind of stuff that has caused us to have cancer. But he sees these life-changing events that are coming ahead of us and prepares our heart and brings us into a relationship with him so that we can be better equipped to deal with that when it happens. He's our Heavenly Father. He doesn't want bad things to happen to us. He wants to prepare us for those things that are going to happen to us because of our fallen world.
So how did you change after your dad's passing?
Well, the biggest change that I did not realize that was going to happen is shortly after that time, I started having people in our family calling me, asking me for advice. And I'm like, okay, well, I wasn't transparent about the financial woes I had or anything like that, so they didn't know. they just saw me living in this big house in Atlanta and, all this kind of stuff. So, but they were calling me for advice, and it didn't dawn on me until about the fifth or sixth call that, oh wow, I'm the patriarch in the family now. I got to man up. I got to change. I've got to be that person that everybody needs and looks up to, and I got to be present for them. And that was a kind of a weird transition, but it was a healthy transition as well, to realize that it's time to put away all childish things and be the person and the leader of the family that you need to be.
How about spiritually?
It was 2010 to 2012. So we were at the time leading our second small group, Stacy and I were, and we were every night when we go to bed, Stacy would read her Bible, and I did not read my Bible every night going to bed. She did, but we would talk about things that were faith oriented. We were going to church on Sunday, but also when I would be driving on a 5-hour drive to the beach rather than listen to my favorite music, I was playing podcasts. I was playing Andy Stanley's messages. I was really trying to understand why God took Dad away. Number one, I've had some very terse conversations with God about that, and I was also trying to figure out what this meant in my life. And the hard rock years and the real estate years and the financial crash was the awakening. This is the period in my life where my faith took flight. And if you kind of think of your faith journey as a graph, let's say it's a stock graph, and the stock is trending from the bottom left-hand corner to the top right on an upward path. The stock just doesn't keep on going all the way up, right? I mean, there are times, so 2010 when Dad's diagnosed with cancer, leaned into my face, says, God's going to cure Dad. We're going to come out of this on the other side, no problem. But when he dies, man, my faith took a dip. I mean, it really did. And I think that's natural. And, that's when I had those tough conversations with Dad, with God, and said, why did you do this? Why did you take Dad? I mean, he was 71 years old. He had a good, I thought maybe 20 or 30 years in him. And he was super healthy, played tennis all the time, was always outdoors, and he was dark complected. And so I never put someone putting on sunscreen. So, but he was super healthy, and, he's just the kind of guy that you think was going to be there until his 90s. But my faith would go up 3 notches and go down a notch, go up 3 notches and go down a notch, which every one of these life instances that happened. And as I wrestled with those things with him, what I learned in that process is your Heavenly Father wants a relationship with you at all costs. That's the number one thing that he wants. And what I learned throughout that process is that it's okay to be upset with God. I mean, think about it. Have you ever been upset with your dad?
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, when you think of God as your father, it changes the relationship that you can have with him. He wants what's best for you. He's going to put guardrails against you. He's going to put you in timeout. He put me in timeout during those real estate years. But he wants a relationship with you. He wants to be a part of your future hopes and dreams, and he wants a deep relationship with you.
Yeah, and you talk about your faith going up and down, and maybe down in this situation, and I'm not going to necessarily disagree with that. You were there, I wasn't. But if you look at natural law, for instance, when you work out, right?
Yeah.
Let's just say you go to the gym and work out.
Yep.
And you begin to do it consistently. When you do that, and if you got a good workout in, when you come home, you hurt.
Right.
You're sore.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, okay, this isn't working. So what's going on mechanically there is muscles are being torn only to rebuild in a stronger way. So when you talk about faith and maybe the faith went backwards, I believe you maybe have been in the middle of a growth phase.
No doubt.
Of your faith.
No doubt.
So I don't know that you're like beginning to reject God. You're just beginning to wrestle with God. And,
absolutely.
In a couple of podcasts ago, we had an amazing woman on there who lost her son,
Oh yeah,
Lori, and she made mention on here, and it was a great spiritual truth that when you're combating with God, when you're wrestling with God, by definition, you must be extremely close to Him to do that. You can't
Right.
wrestle with something that you have at a distance.
Right.
You have to be engaged
Yeah.
and locked in, and
It's a relationship.
so and when I hear, the things that have happened over the last X number of years for you, you had the financial situation,
Yep.
pretty substantial, loss of a child,
Mm-hmm.
and now the loss of your father.
Right.
So these situations are continuing to present themselves in your life.
Yep.
You're participating in some real challenging things. I don't
Mhm.
think they are designed specifically for you. They're designed for much
Right.
greater purposes that are God's and that we will never fully ever understand.
Right.
But from your perspective, this is 3 times
Mm-hmm.
that your priorities are getting challenged.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not over yet.
No. And as a parent, the toughest thing that you ever have to face is when a child is not doing well, or your child's not doing well. And in 2014, my middle child, Kate Elise, was just going through a very weird process. I mean, she was just losing weight very fast, and she was tired all the time. And really, I think that the pivotal moment in me realizing that something's really, really wrong is it's dead summer in Atlanta in the South. It's 100 and whatever it is, 5 degrees, 100% humidity. We're out at the pool. She's laying down. All the kids are playing, swimming. She's laying down in the pool chairs, and she's got towels on top of her because she's freezing. I was like, okay, something's really, really wrong.
That's not right.
Yeah. And so at the time, we had been going to see doctors to try and figure out what was causing her to lose weight and to be tired all the time, and went through all these tests, and I was convinced that she had cancer. I guess maybe just coming off the heels of my dad's experience, but I was just so worried that she had cancer. And so much so that when the doctor came in, and after 5 months of tests and spending 30, 40 nights in the hospital, said that your daughter has Crohn's disease, my wife was in the room, Stacy, and she just started boohooing. I was elated because I had prepared myself for the worst. And Crohn's disease, for you who don't know, is an imbalance in your gut of good bacteria and bad bacteria, and what that causes is a lot of, you need to know where the restroom is at all time because you might have to go to the restroom at a given without any notice. And the treatment there are several different treatments, and every case of Crohn's disease is different. But the one treatment that we subscribed to was a Remicade infusion, and she would go every 5 weeks, 6 weeks, and plug into a machine and get this infusion called Remicade, and that has seemed to help with the problem. But we went through a lot of journey, a lot of exploration with her diet and taking out gluten and all that kind of stuff. So it was just a big change in our family ecosystem that really made Stacy and I work a lot more together. It brought me closer to my middle daughter, because when your daughter's going through that kind of stuff and has medical issues, awkwardness goes out the window, and you talk about a lot of things that little 13-year-old daughters don't want to have with their mom and dad. But she is flourishing now, and so we got through that. But during that time of 13 and 14, 2013, 2014, we were in a really good spot. I mean, our faith was really taking flight, and I would say that was probably the years of logarithmic growth of our faith journey, but also my relationship with Stacy was just blossoming in a way that, didn't know it could blossom. I was spending more time at home. I was more grateful about friends and family and church, and was spending a lot more time with my kids, and we were doing family trips together a lot more, and just it was a really good time. And I look back through those 5 years leading from 6 years from 2008 to 2014. And as I look back through that time period, I remember the good times. Even though all this was going on, it's like God just stripped that away. And I just remember our family dinners and peewee baseball games and going to ballets and things like that. And so it was also a time of a lot of fun with the family as well, even though several different horrible things that happened in our family.
Yeah, and I think about Stacy, and I think about the kind of person that I had known her to be, and then through that time, and she seems like her faith had really deepened.
Oh yeah,
going into that, almost such that I feel like maybe she took a real leadership role as an example of stability in the time of volatility.
No doubt, she was our chief faith officer in the house for sure.
And just every time I was around her, calm, cool, a little funny, but still, I mean, kids running around, you're all over the place, and she was just steady Eddie and just as easygoing, and you could see that peace in her in the midst of chaos sometimes that turns into, it is life with a very busy husband and 3 small kids and all that stuff. She was just in my times around her at that time, was just very stable in her spiritual life. It looked like to me, and sort of in hindsight now, looking back on that, knowing what you say now about her own faith, that's clearly to me what that was.
No doubt. And now I've got daughters who are dating ages. We've had a lot of conversations about mine and Stacy's relationship and what that was like and why I fell in love with mommy and all these, it's kind of preparing them for their life journey. And as I look back at our relationship, like you said, I was kind of like the Tasmanian devil. Her, not in a bad way, but just like I was.
We could sidebar for about an hour now, and I could tell stories. We're not going to do it.
Okay, I was Captain Chaos. I was trying to make a lot of things happen. But her favorite motto was keep calm and carry on, because that's just the person she was. She was just this really gentle soul that she always said, I just want to be normal. I just want to be normal. I just want to have friends. I want to have fun. And she was so much fun and just brought, she was I fell in love with her because of who she was. And it was because she wasn't a perfect person by any stretch of the imagination. She wasn't success oriented. She just wanted to have fun and have good friends. And I like to spin up a big party and have 30 or 40 people at the house. She wanted to have 2 or 3 people over and go deep with them. And I think that she was my yang. We were different in that regard, and she challenged me to change and to go deeper with people than I'd ever gone before. And I was probably a little bit more, it's weird. I got deep with the people I work with, but then we'd come back into town and I wouldn't know the people that were in our lives in town. And so she really challenged that skill set for me to go deep with people and get to know them in a much deeper way. And she also, being our chief faith officer in the house, just seeing her at night reading her Bible and just seeing her and going through these small groups with her friends and doing a deep dive and asking questions, it really it was a catapult for me to get deeper in my faith experience as well. She was a ballerina all her life from a very early age, and I think that's kind of a metaphor for the way that she handled herself through life. She took all of life's morass, and especially the stuff that I created, and turned it into this elegant ballet. And I think also after losing Dad, I made a comment that I lost my biggest fan. I gained another one. And the fact that she stood by me and said, well, they can't eat us, really made me fall in love with her even more
Sure.
because she had my back, All she wanted was a relationship with me and for us to be a family with the kids.
So, bring us to Mother's Day.
So, all this stuff that I've been dealing with the past 8 years could never prepare me for what happened on Mother's Day 2016. It was typical Mother's Day. We were going to take the family. It was in May, so it was a lovely day outside. We were taking the family out to the pool and had our cousins and aunt and uncle come with us, and we just had this great day. I had this pool bag, which had towels and snacks and gifts. And then this day was Mom's Day. We were making it Mom's Day. She didn't have to do anything, so I never, she always did that, so I was taking that burden off of her. And so we head to the pool, and my aunt comes over to me and says, something's not right with Stacy. So I go over and see her, and she's in the bathroom, and I finally get in the bathroom, and it was a seizure that everything goes in slow motion. And literally for her to pull her hand up from her lap to her head would have taken 15 to 20 seconds. So rushed her to the hospital, which was only about 2 miles away. And I thought that she was having a stroke. Her dad had several strokes, and I thought she was having a stroke. And I was on the doctor in the ER. It's like, I know that we only have a window of 3 hours to get her this med to solve the stroke. We got to get her to the med. And he pulled me into one of those little curtained areas and said, listen, your wife's not having a stroke. She's got a brain tumor. And, I consider myself to be, maybe my IQ is a little bit higher than 12. Maybe it's like a 14. So I consider myself a reasonably intelligent guy, but I could not complete a thought from beginning to end at that point. I did not know what to do. I was at a loss. So then we get admitted to the hospital, and we meet with surgeons, and this is so surreal. We were just at the pool, and we're meeting with surgeons, and they're saying, we've scheduled her for surgery tomorrow. We got to get this tumor out. She's going to die if we don't get it taken out. And, I was lost to what to do. Thankfully, we had some angels in our family and friends network who parachuted in to help me solve this problem and, really trying to figure out the best path of care for Stacy. But the one in particular was Mace Hall, her best friend here in Atlanta, who came in and said, hey, let's take a pause. We got 2 weeks. Let's figure this out. And because of that help, I think that we really got her the best care. But that night, I think my aunt, Stacy's mom, had now come into town. We had family. I just said, we've gone through all these meetings. I'm still in my bathing suit. And I, just said, I need to go home and grab a shower and change of clothes. I need to change clothes. I just need a time, just a brief period of an hour just to myself to regroup and rethink and process everything that had hit me. And I drove home. We're a mile from the hospital. I drove home, and I'm unloading the car, and I pull out this pool bag. It still has towels, presents, Mother's Day cards in it. And I just, that bag has been a metaphor for my whole life as to how quickly life can change on a dime. And like we said earlier, life is precious and every day is a blessing, and you just don't know how many days you're going to have, and you need to treat every day as a blessing. But that pool bag was a very powerful metaphor, and I just took it out of the car, and literally before even bringing it in the house, it's like I dropped it out of my hands, and I just looked at it. It was like, wow. I mean, I wish I could rewind, 8 hours and go back. But our life had changed forever.
It had changed before with the loss of your baby, and it had changed again with the loss of your dad. And, you think on who Stacy is to this family and her spiritual influence, the glue to making the whole operation work, the love of your life, and now you're in a battle.
Yep. And I go back to you saying all those things about Stacy because she was the one every morning that was having the blender going and making smoothies while playing music and getting backpacks ready for school and making sure the kids did their assignments. And when they had a book reading, she was the one that would take them to school and read the book with the class. Or when they had, I haven't thought about this in a while, but when they had a come as your favorite book character, she put my daughter's hair in just made her look like Cindy Lou Who, and I think she had Coke cans on the inside of her hair to make it go up like a foot above her head. But she was just so creative and made life fun. And at night, when we're cleaning the kitchen, she would put on Queen or some kind of great rock song, and we were dancing around with brooms. But that's who she was. She was just an amazing, fun soul. She would take anything and turn it into, she loved life, and she just would take any incident and turn it into not a party, but a fun situation. And she just made life fun for me and the kids. And she was the faith anchor of our family, but she was also the calming effect in our house. She was also tending to everybody's boo-boos. She made you feel like you were the most important person in the world. And, she also she took care of everything. She did. And she wasn't perfect. She was constantly 15 minutes late everywhere she went. So you just had to, we called that KPT. It was Kessler Pacific time. And so you just had to build that 15-minute equation into everything that she did. But everything that she did she gave to everybody. I think that's the best way to sum up her soul. She was constantly giving of herself to people to make their life better. No matter if it was the kids, her friends, our family. So many friends have called her and would spend hours on the phone with her about issues that they were going through in their life. And she would just be there lending an ear. Even though she had Girl Scouts going on or Christmas paper wrapping sale at the school or whatever it might be, she was just give of her time and of her soul. She just loved making people happy. Yeah. That was the bottom line.
I remember her doing that even in her most difficult times in the illness. It didn't seem to stop her from that.
Yeah.
She never turned that, in my experience, toward her. It was always, oh, it'll be fine, and let's talk about you and that sort of stuff. So how did you guys handle this news in the battle ahead?
Yeah, so all that really was a blur. I mean, it all happened so fast. The main thing that we did is, I think, having Mace Hall come in and say, let's just take a pause, let's figure out what the path of care is, really gave us, we weren't being rushed into surgery the next day. That really gave me some peace that, okay, we could solve the problem. At the time, we don't know what kind of tumor it is. You don't know until you get it out. And so we had great insurance with my company and just decided we were going to go to the best of the best from a surgical perspective, from a treatment perspective. And no matter what happened, we were going to turn it into a party as much as we could. We were going to have fun along the way, and we were going to try to make it as enjoyable for everybody and comfortable for everybody around us. So we ended up in having to work real hard over the next week, getting us into the best surgeon, one of the best surgeons in the world, at Duke, and drove to Duke one time to meet with him, then came back and then drove over there again, which is about a 6-hour one-way drive. And within 2 weeks, we're in surgery. And probably the most difficult conversation that I've ever had to have is when my wife came out of surgery and she had half of her head shaved. She had a mohawk, rocking a mohawk, and had 67 stitches in her head, in the form of kind of an upside down horseshoe over her ear, where they had to take the skull plate off, go into her head, and take out this golf ball sized tumor out of her brain. And I had to tell her that it was the worst kind of cancer you can have, worst kind of brain cancer you can have anyway. It was a glioblastoma multiforme, a grade 4, fast-growing tumor. The good news is we got it. We got a lot of it out. I think the doctor said we got all that we could see out. The problem with these is that these GBMs have tentacles and they just grow really, really fast. So, we were very blessed that we got it out. And I'd say the days after the tumor, I felt like my faith world was rocked to its core. Not that I stopped I did question my faith, but not that I was saying there is no God. I just questioned my faith. Where's God? There's no way this is happening. This is so surreal. And after that happened, I started leaning in again over the next week. Stacy started leaning in too, amidst her, being in the hospital and then coming home before we had surgery. She was back reading her Bible and just, trying to, keep life as normal as possible. And at that time, I really started reading my Bible more than ever. And as amazing as it would happen, and I can't remember exactly the timeline, but right after she had her surgery, my daughter and I were scheduled to go to this ranch called JH Ranch, which is a Christian adventure camp on the California-Oregon border. And I went out there, quite frankly, to change my 13-year-old at the time and to get her an abiding relationship with God so that she would change. And when I got out there, God had plans for me. He needed me to change. And having that happen right after surgery, as I look back on it, was a perfect time for me to go out there because I was rocked to my core. And during those 7 days of that camp, God met me in Etna and talked to me a lot during that time. And that was probably the biggest spiritual awakening I had in my entire life.
Can you describe that more?
So, again, I went out there thinking I was going to fix my daughter, not that she needed fixing. She's a great kid, but there were, every 13-year-old 13 comes, right? And so, I wanted her to be more respectful in the house and be more helpful and do her chores and be the perfect kid, because that's what we all want. We want our kids to be perfect, our life to be perfect. And what God told me while I was out there is, I was a great provider. I wasn't a great father. I was a great provider for Stacy. I wasn't the best husband. And just so we're clear, my relationship with Stacy, after I met her, I've never kissed another person. I mean, it's just, I was all in from day one and still hadn't. So that was just, a very crucial time in my faith journey. But God telling me and having those brutal conversations with me, it really made me understand what being a father and being a dad truly was. And it was being there and loving no matter what, not success-oriented love. If you make a good grade in your test, you got all my love. But if you make a C, you got half my love. It was loving them no matter what and being their biggest fan. And, there were a lot of things that happened to me on that trip. But I think I came back, the flight out there, I was a different father and different husband than I was on the flight back.
And I think that you got to know that your Father loves you no matter what.
No doubt. Absolutely. And that he wanted to know everything, and he knew everything, and wanted to be a part of everything. And I think as my early on faith relationship was inviting God in when I didn't have all the answers.
Yeah.
You know? And this was, I want to be part of everything. You know, as a father, we want to be a part of our kids' successes, failures, and they don't want us to be a part of the failure side or things that are dark in their lives because they're ashamed and they think that we're going to come down on them. And same thing with your Heavenly Father. We do the same thing. We protect our relationship with our Heavenly Father. Hey, I want you involved because my career's coming to an end, or I've got financial issues. I want you involved because my wife's got cancer or my dad's dying. But these dark areas of my life, you know, I'm tuning you out now. And what God wants us is to be a part. He wants to be a part of everything. And that was a part of that JH experience. And another part was, like I said, that I had now started reading the Bible. What I learned at JH was all about journaling. And the journaling part of my faith really helped me understand what the Word meant to me. And I started buying these weekly planners that you have, you know, where you got one page and it's a week per page. And so you have a good paragraph size per day. And that's what I use for my journals. And I've got 3 or 4 years of those now. And that became a practice of mine and really helped my journey take flight. But that journaling also became very revealing about what was going on with my heart at the time. And the journaling after I got back was, God, please save Stacy. You know, we're going to praise your name, save Stacy, and you're going to get all the credit. And you know, this is going to be our story. And so when your wife has a glioblastoma, and literally a GBM patient on average has 8 months after they're diagnosed. And so we were going to be the ones that beat this, and we're going to sing his name as the great healer and let that be a part of our ministry, if you will.
So you were praying, understandably so, that this was going to be a miracle.
Right. And in James, you know, the verse, I can't remember which one it is, talks about pray unceasingly and without question. I did pray unceasingly, but I had questions. And so I had a lot of people praying for a miracle. You know, we all knew that it was a miracle. And, you know, the toughest conversations that I had was coming back from the hospital and Duke and telling her, having a family meeting and saying, hey, kids, mommy's got cancer. That's a tough conversation to have. And we were coached about how to handle that conversation, and they didn't ask a lot of deep questions about it. I just told them we were going to go to the best of the best, and we're going to have, you know, we're going to live our lives like normal, and God's in control. And, you know, I don't even think I said God is in control at the time, because that was before I went to JH. After I got back is when I realized and started saying God's in control. But then at JH Ranch, I remember exactly where we were. There's a day where, you know, the whole experience out there is you and your 13-year-old child, which is my daughter, developing a vertical relationship with your Lord and Savior and giving it all to Him and surrendering to Him and finding out what your purpose in life is in God's eyes, but also your horizontal relationship with the person that you love that you came there with. I mean, that's really in a nutshell, that's what you're trying to do. And the last day we go out to we pick a special place, and people who've been before me say, you got to go to Kangaroo Lake. So we went out to Kangaroo Lake, which is this gorgeous lake on the Oregon-California border, and it's got a mountain in the background. It's just so picturesque. And we sat there, and Allie Grace and I talked about our relationship and our walk and what the week meant and all that kind of stuff. And as we're walking back, we had about maybe a half a mile hike back to our car. She said, Daddy, how bad is Mommy's cancer? I said, it's bad. How bad is it? It's really bad. Is she going to die? I said, we're trying everything in our power not to let her die, but she may die because of this. How long? I don't know. How long is normal? So Allie Grace is my child that pushes the envelope. And so, I gave her full transparency, and that was a tough conversation to have. But when I got back from JH is when I really started. I think I'd made, we talked about earlier, I made the migration from, or the evolution from partnering with to surrendering. And then I was surrendering. I was like, God, just be here with us. Please save Stacy. Give her comfort, give me peace, let me know what to do. Because then, if you think about it, my life had turned. I went from, again, I was working for this technology company at the time, and we'd sold to a company, a publicly traded company, and so my role had taken on a different realm. But they were great. They stood beside me. They let me have time off to tend to Stacy. But my life at that point was, my wife couldn't drive anymore, and so I had to be, shuttle carpool. We had to get helpers to help us out around the house. Family had to be here a lot, and so our family dynamics changed dramatically during that time. And that was, I'd say May of 16 through the end of 16-ish to beginning of 17. That summer was a great summer. The first summer of 16, Stacy had to go up for weekly treatments at Boston, radiation treatments. And so in Stacy's fine fashion, she goes, we're going to make this in a party. So every week she had to get radiation Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday mornings in Boston for, I think it was 7 weeks. So every week we would stay in a different borough or neighborhood in Boston, and had friends that'd fly up or family would fly up, and we just made it into this great. It was a great fun summer. It really was. Stacy was bounced back really good from surgery. Everybody, I think it was tough for me because I knew how bad it was, but everybody saw Stacy taking Pilates classes and walking around the park, and she looked normal, and she had this wig that we called Simone, so she was wearing Simone all the time, but she was having this kind of normal existence from an exterior perspective, but deep down inside we knew how bad it was, and we knew it was probably growing pretty fast again, was going to come back, and we were going to be dealt with surgery again, but we were praying that it wasn't. So that gets us through the summer, and that was, again, a great time. Kids flew up and were with us, and I think the biggest thing that we decided as a family, or Stacy decided, is we're not going to let the kids miss a beat. We're just going to keep on. They're going to go to camps. We're going to have beach trips. And I can remember, I think one beach trip, she went up for her radiation treatments, maybe with some friends. I took the kids to the beach, and she flew straight down to the beach to meet us. And that was just how we were going to roll. We were not going to let this upset the family and derail our family. And so the kids, I think, if you ask them, they would say they had a very normal summer in 2016. And then we went on a trip to spring break down the Dominican with another family, and we were in this place, and she just kept getting confused about where everything was. Like, you and I have a good geospatial map of this house that we're in and where the park is and all this kind of stuff. She just got confused and could not keep the map in her head, and she kept going into the wrong rooms, and I knew something was wrong. So we get back and have a scan, and it's come back again, and we got to be rushed back into surgery. And so got it taken out again, and Stacy was so funny. She wanted to make everybody at ease, so we sent these, I guess it was kind of like a TikTok back at the time, but it was dub smash, and we sent these dub smashes of us after surgery with her head wrapped up in these bandages again, another 65 or some odd stitches in her head. Did these dub smashes and sent them back, which were really funny. but her whole purpose in that is to make everybody at ease. Oh, I know. I remember what it was. It was Easter, because we had to talk to the kids on Easter, and that was killing her, that she couldn't be home for Easter with the kids. Family took the kids and gave them a fun Easter while we were in surgery. So we did Easter service up there, got back, and then life kind of went back normal again. And then in early 2018, it started to decline pretty fast, and she had a couple falls, and I was actually in work in Brazil, and she had another seizure, pretty bad seizure. My cousins called and said, "You need to come home now." I'm in Londrina, Brazil. How do I get home? And so I basically I ran through the Sao Paulo airport going counter to counter, asking any airlines, "Do you have a flight to the U.S. tonight? Do you have a flight to the U.S. tonight? Do you have a flight to the U.S. tonight?" And finally found a airline I'd never heard of that got me back to Miami. And then I got back home, and by then her seizure had calmed down, and she's sitting on the couch, and I walk in, and she goes, "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be in Brazil." But, that was a very, the way that those tumors happen, they grow and then they release, and they grow and they release. And so she kept having these seizures and issues with balance. And then she had a really bad one that caused her not to be able to walk. And we ended up in this rehabilitation facility to get her to walk again. And then we had to get on steroids. And, the reason I have pictures of her all over the house is I don't want the kids to remember the way she looked then, because she was such a gorgeous person, still was, but it just changed her. The steroids and everything just changed her look, and she was not able to walk like she was. So I wanted the kids to remember her as a healthy person. And then it became evident in March, April, that this was not going well. And during that time, Stacy had talked a lot about, we talked a lot about heaven. We talked a lot about our faith. We talked about what our eternity means. And she had peace about it. She told me and friends, "I'm not worried about dying. I know I have eternal life." And all along she said, "Listen, Mark, if we're going to go to the best of the doctors in the world, but if this doesn't turn out the right way, if I beat this, I win. And if I lose to cancer, I still win, because I got eternity and I'll see y'all again." And that was her mindset throughout the whole process of this horrible disease. And then Mother's Day week of 2018, so exactly 2 years later, she passed away. It was 2 days after Mother's Day 2018, so it was 2 years and maybe 3 days after she passed away. And maybe 4 nights before, me and the kids, I gathered the kids out on the porch. We'd moved Stacy down to the main level because she couldn't go up and down the stairs. And we moved the kids out to the porch, and I had a family vote. And the family vote was, do we want Mommy to die in the house or to die in the hospital? And the reason I did this is because I didn't want the kids to have any issues with the house that we lived in. Ghosts, or how kids' minds work. And so the girls voted for Mommy to die in the house. Marcus wanted her to go to the hospital. I said, "Well, why, buddy?" And she goes, "Because they can save her." And another one of the hardest things I've ever had to tell my son is that, they can't save her. She's going to die. And she'll probably die in the next week. And then he changed his vote. He wanted her to stay in the house. The night before she passed, we all stayed in the room with Mommy and watched a movie in her room. And she had family at the house. She had friends there. It was tough. And we were all gathered around her when she actually passed. And it was a very surreal moment. I mean, you could actually feel her soul going to heaven. I mean, it's hard to explain, but you could feel the sensation of her soul leaving her body and going to heaven. And we spent the night before, the night that she passed, the kids went in one at a time and spent a little time with mommy, and my oldest went in there and sang Somewhere Over the Rainbow, which is what mommy used to sing to Ally Grace when she was a baby to get her to go to sleep. And we came out and we sat on my porch, and there were some bushes back behind the porch. And we were talking about, this is a couple hours. So Stacy, they wheel Stacy out. We pray over her, and they take her off to the funeral home, and we go sit on the porch, and behind us in the bushes, these birds were just going bananas. I've never heard it beforehand. We've lived in this house for 17 years. Now I've lived in it 3 more years, so 20 years total. I've never heard the birds go crazy like this in these bushes behind our house. And, I later have friends tell me that birds and souls are something that have something in common. So no doubt that was being disturbed as Stacy's soul was going to heaven. It was very horrible, beautiful, tragic, gorgeous moment all rolled into one. Very tough, but also very rewarding to know that your wife is not sick anymore. And she beat cancer, and she's in heaven, and she's restored.
So that's really raw, and it's a emotionally just brutal thing to experience.
Yeah.
What is your dialogue like with God in the face of your wife's suffering and your children's suffering?
Yeah.
By being confronted with this experience.
Mm-hmm.
What is your dialogue with God like in those times?
Your faith has these ups and downs as you go through something like this. And I've been praying for God to cure Stacy from the beginning of her journey till let's say the last, 6 months. Well, the last 3 months. And then when she got really sick, I was her night nurse for about 3 weeks maybe. And I decided I just couldn't do that anymore. It was just, it was just tough. I wanted to be her doting husband. I didn't want to take care of all of her needs. And called somebody in. But at that point in time, your prayers changed to God save her, to God just make her comfort, give her some comfort. God give her some comfort. And then in the end, the last week, you're like, God, just please take her, because this is no way to live. But it's so funny, I was still praying for that miracle, even when she was taking the funeral home. I was still praying for a miracle until she was cremated, until I saw the urn with her ashes. I really thought that there was still a chance God was going to do a miracle. It was going to be a Lazarus moment, and it wasn't. And so my prayers weren't answered. And am I happy about that? No. But as my message to anybody that's lost someone like that they've loved is, God gives us this amazing body, this creation of this amazing body that we can love and have passion, and we can find our soulmate, and we can have conversations and think through things. And the human body is just an amazing creation. And the fact that we had 4 babies to actually come out of my wife is just bizarre. And that's just, if anybody is not a believer, they need to be in the room when their loved one gives birth to their child. And I just think that those things that you take for granted, I found my soulmate for 25, had my soulmate for 25 years. I had somebody that truly loved me beyond anything I deserved for 25 years. And the joyful, grateful heart that God gave me realizes that. And that's the message, I think. The message is, am I sad? Absolutely. Do I wish it had gone a different way? For sure. But as I look back on my life, what a unbelievable, I wouldn't trade a thing. If somebody had told me when we were dating, hey, your wife's going to die at 42 years old, are you still going to marry her? Absolutely. No doubt about it. I would have signed up for that in a second because of the relationship that we had with each other, and she made me a better person. So for that, I'm so thankful to God. I got 3 kids. I've got this amazing life. She's been my minister. She brought me closer to my faith. She challenged me to be a better person, a better father, a better husband. And God brought her into my life for that reason.
But is your faith challenged at all? I mean, is there any part of you
Heck yeah.
that's like, I'm pissed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No doubt
You
about
have
it.
ripped the love of my life from me
Yep.
and from our kids.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And like I said, I've had a lot of very difficult conversations with God, and after I don't think it really set in, Stacy, until after she passed. And it's kind of like when you have a baby, the whole family comes in, and then they leave, and you're like, what are we going to do with this baby?
Yeah,
You know?
that's right.
So after the funeral, everybody came in. I had friends come in you came in. I had friends come in from all over the place. I had former teammates from El Salvador fly in. It was just an awesome experience to be covered up with that much love. And my family stayed with us for months to just make sure that, I guess I wasn't going to screw up everything. But I think that when it really hit me about how big my life was about to change, that's when I got pissed. Can we say pissed on the podcast?
Sure you can.
Okay. But that's when I got really pissed at God, because my whole life had been about success. I didn't have time to be successful anymore. I now had to be carpool queen. I had 2 teenage daughters that were starting to date or having difficult mean girl relationships, and I'm not equipped to deal with that, but I have to. I've got kids that are going from childhood to manhood and womanhood, and I've got to deal with that by myself. Not by myself. I had family members help out, but as a sole person in the house all the time, that relied on me, and I had to help with homework, and I had to make sure that they had their soccer forms done and the forms for camp, and it was just a lot. And for those dads out there that think that they work hard and their wife just, gets the kids off for school and that's it, let me tell you, being a mom is the hardest thing that I've ever had to do. And you should never think of that's not a full-time job. It's a full-time and more. The difference between my business life and my life now as a mom is my business life. It was a simple equation. It was, you do this, need to do this more. You meet with your teams and we solve the problem together. When you're a mom, it's emotional and it's dramatic, and you're dealing with your employees in that relationship don't have a full frontal lobe, and so you're trying to help them navigate through the life's biggest potholes, and it's just a taxing journey, and it is a thankless job. And now I find myself going through certain life issues with my kids, and the number one thing I end up doing is just looking up at the heavens saying, Stacy, I'm so sorry. I had no idea what you were dealing with, because this is hard. This is so hard. And so that's, I think, when I was really bitter at God, is that not that the success journey got stripped away from me. It was that I was alone in this battle. And again, I have family members that are there all the time. When I say alone, it's when your daughter comes to you crying at 11:30 at night, no one's there but you, because she's had a mean girl do something to her. No one's there but you. And so that's what I mean when I've been alone. Our family has covered us up with love, and our friends have, but those are the moments where you just wish you had a wife, not only to deal with those things, but also just to strategize with you on how to handle it.
And they need a mom, right?
They need a mom. Yeah. And I need a wife, it's a tough transition to have, especially all the kids need their mom, but that mother-daughter relationship as they go into their teens. I mean, Allie Grace had her 16th birthday, sweet 16 birthday party here at the house, I think 5 days before Stacy passed. She was unconscious and, in the bed with, just 100 people over here at the house. And I just look back at that and think about Allie Grace and what her life was at the time. And it was just, that's just got to be awful for a girl turning sweet 16 where her mom can't even be a part of her sweet 16 birthday party. And at the time, Kayleigh was 13 and dealing with her health issues. And, LaMarcus was, I think, 10 at the time. So very difficult for all of their journey. But I think that bitterness in my faith journey really sank in. And the darkest days that I had are twofold. Number one is the 6 months after Stacy passed, trying to figure out that new life. And then when COVID hit and I was really all alone. Family and friends could not come around. It was just me as the guardian of the kids. So those two kind of factors played into very dark moments in my life and my faith journey.
So how are you different?
After Stacy passed?
How are you different than 10 years ago?
Oh, geez. Well, I think that 10 years ago, I look back at the person I was 10 years ago, and I was just, I was a great guy, I think. I mean, I was a nice person, but I was just caught up in being successful and having the best of the best of the best. And that's just, I'm totally different now. I'm comfortable. I want to have peace and quality time and quality relationships, and I want to have quality business deals. I don't want to have a lot of them. I want to control my calendar. I want to wake up in the morning and do what is important. And that means I want to spend time with the Lord. I want to take my kids to school. I want to, instead of me taking the kids to school and spending my time on the phone trying to solve some kind of crisis at work, I want to turn the phone off and be with my son and my daughters and talk to them and ask them questions about who their best friends are, what their best teachers were, and those kind of things that back then I wasn't doing.
It's like being present.
Right. It's not just being there, it's being all in. And that's the big difference. I was a provider, and I was coaching games or, going to the performances, but I wasn't all in. And now I'm all in. And mainly because I have to be. So if there's a blessing in this whole horrible situation that I've been in with Stacy's passing, is that I've had to know a lot about my kids, and I've got a deeper relationship with them than I ever have before. And it's not perfect, and it's not beautiful, and I get mad and I get upset with them, and I raise my voice at them, but it is a different type of role that I've ever had with them, and I'm thankful for that. I would not have had that if Stacy had gotten sick. And I'm not saying that I'm thankful that she got sick, but I'm grateful for what it made me into as a father.
Do you understand God differently now? Are there things that you've learned about his nature that maybe you didn't know or appreciate or fully grasp then? What are some things that you've learned about him?
Yeah. Well, the main thing that I've learned and through all this is, and this is where it kind of gets a little weird, is that when you're put in the situation I am, where you're raising 3 teenagers by yourself, and and every morning, one thing I did is I created a space. So the table that we're at, we've actually set up this makeshift studio on this table. It's the booth that I bought my wife when we were that we met in. I went to the restaurant and I actually bought the whole booth, the 2 booth seats, and the table that we met in, and I gave it to her as a wedding gift at the rehearsal dinner. I think it was. I had it.
It
back.
was. I was sitting right next to it. It was covered up with the big giant blanket.
It was a black blanket with
Yeah.
a white bow on it, and we're up the front, and she's smiling at me, and I said, "Hey, there's your wedding gift. Everybody's giving their toast. I want you to go open your wedding gift." And she looks at it. She goes, "If this is a washer and dryer, I'm gonna kill you." But we've made this makeshift studio in my house, in our bedroom, with this table. It's actually the booth that we met in. And one thing I did after Stacy passed it was in the basement for years, and I took it out and I put it on our main level, put it over in the corner of the room, and that's where I put my Bible and my journal, and it was intentional. Every day, the first thing I was going to do is I was going to dive into the Word and just I needed God to help me solve this problem, because again, I didn't have the answer. I couldn't fix this problem anymore. I'm raising 3 teenagers by myself, I'm still trying to keep my career intact at the time, and it was messy and it was hard and it was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. But that time, and I wasn't sleeping well, so I was waking up at sometimes 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. And I don't know if you ever had this situation. I had the 7-second rule. If I woke up at that time, if I stayed awake more than 7 seconds, the wheels started turning. I was like, okay, I just got to get up. And so I would just go down to this booth that I met my wife in and open the Bible, and was intentional about what I was trying to learn about how to be a better father and just be more patient and more still. And I think that the big thing that I learned in that time is, I don't know what verse it is, but it's just be still and listen to only my voice. And at that time, I had no other options except for that. And so I was being very still, being very intentional about my walk with God, and was listening to his voice about what I needed to do in order to get me through this very, very dark period of my life. And that God hasn't spoken to me. I mean, there's no burning bush with him calling out to me. The heavens didn't part and his voice came out. But if you are still and you've got that, you come at it through life with that type of context, and somebody says something to you, you go, oh, okay, that's God, or you see something, oh, that's God trying to talk to me. It's these little clues, and that's the difference between, you said I was a great leader early on. That's the difference between leading and being led. And I think that this what I learned in that 6 months of very dark period, and I'm still learning more and more every day, is paying attention to the tension in your life, which directs you away from potential harm, and paying attention to those things that are going to give you great joy in life and peace in life, and paying attention to those messages that you get from God and that I get from Stacy all the time. And being led is just it's a very remarkable superpower in the universe that's inexplicable.
Learning to be led is a challenge.
Oh my gosh.
Especially
if you're a leader.
Yeah,
right.
Someone who's led
Right.
a good bit of their lives. And most people, to some degree, have taken on leadership roles and want to be able to increase their ability to lead and to develop those skills and to be good at that kind of activity. But the spiritual life calls us to follow.
Yeah.
Jesus walked around and said, hey,
follow me.
Follow me.
Yeah.
That was what he asked us to do.
Mm-hmm.
He gave us commands and stuff like that, but the main thing is follow me. And it's hard to follow him when we're trying to make the decisions for him. When you sort of draw yourself back and try to see the entire picture at once, and as you've talked through a lot of this in this conversation, this has to be an awakening to the process of God calling you to follow him.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right? I mean, you can almost see it escalating over time.
No doubt. And it's that whole graph of a stock chart I kind of go back to. It's not a perfect linear equation up, but it's a rocky road, with a upward trajectory over time. And I think that following him has allowed me. I mean, there's no reason why my economic situation and my family situation should be where it is right now, and it's all because of him. It really is. And I look back on after Stacy passed and me trying to just wrestle the problem to the ground at the house, but then when I just took a seat back and let life kind of happen a little bit, but also under the eyes of being still and listening to him and being intentional about my journey and my journaling and my faith journey, and trying to get, during that time, I also told God, I said, listen, I can't get my life as a business executive in the company I was with was a traveling job. And it was literally, I mean, I'm almost a 2 million miler on Delta. So I couldn't do that anymore. And there's only so much time that my company, they were great. Trimble was so good to me. They stood beside us in this 2-year journey, and just a great company to be a part of. And they just really stood beside me. But at some point in time, they're going to ask me, hey, okay, come on, man, get back on the road. We got some stuff to accomplish, or we wanted you to move the family to this different area of the country and take on something else. And it just didn't feel right. So I left in 2019, in November 2019. So that's about a year and a half after Stacy passed. And that was another thing. So the two things were consistent in my life for the last 20 years were that job. I had it for 19.3 years, and my relationship with Stacy, which we were married for 19 and a half years and dated for about 5 years before that. So those were the two consistents. Both of them were gone. So now what next? And that was a really weird period of time. And the intentionality in my quiet time was all about me figuring out that next step in my life where I could be intentional about my faith, but I could give of my time a lot more freely to things that I was passionate about in my faith journey, but also I couldn't shut off my business brain. So I had to have something to satiate that. And how do I thread the needle between all that, but put my kids in the first position? And that's the thing that became evident in my journey, is that for the next 6 years until my kids go off to college, my kids were number one and everything else was second. And when I left, I had these great job offers that were offered to me. And one of them was really hard to turn down economically, but I just said, you know what? And God told me, not now. It's not no, it's just no for right now.
Yeah, this whole surrender concept, surrender doesn't mean laying down and doing nothing.
No.
Right? Surrender means paying attention.
Yeah.
And listen to God's voice.
Yeah.
And letting him guide and direct your steps and where you're going. And finding that peace in difficult things. And it is giving the outcomes to him.
Yeah.
And saying, I don't have to make these decisions that's going to ensure our financial success. It is, God, you're going to guide me and you're going to provide for me.
Yep.
And I don't know what it looks like.
Right.
And I'm cool with that because I just trust you.
Right.
That's scary, but a little bit.
It's exciting.
It's exciting.
Yeah,
That's exactly the word I was going for.
Yeah.
Right?
It is.
And that's a crazy thing, and it's counterintuitive. It's like, no, I got to control this. I got to make these decisions.
Right.
I got to make as much money as I can make and all these other things.
Right.
But when you say, I believe you.
Yeah.
I believe in you. I believe you exist. I believe you are faithful.
Yeah.
You've said it. You've been faithful to me, and you have taken care of me in times I don't even know how you did it.
Yeah.
That's what I see surrender as.
Agreed.
It's not laying down.
No, things aren't going to happen. God doesn't want you to do that. God wants you to go.
No, he's given us so many tools.
Right.
He
Exactly.
just wants us to let him guide our steps.
And you said pay attention. So when those job offers came in, paying attention to the tension in your life I think is so important, because when they came in and I was talking to these guys, my chest would get just tight, and I'm like, and I would tell them, I'm like, listen, I can't travel. and the way I would do a job like this, which was a CEO job, is I got to be the first one on the battlefield. I got to travel. I got to be in the manufacturing plant. I got to be, I got to get back on that wheel again. And as I thought about that, my chest just got tight and just didn't feel right.
You knew.
I knew, but part of me was trying to justify it.
But the old you is like, what an opportunity.
Well, and the old me kind of came back, and because I wanted to show my old company, hey, look what I'm doing, But after I made the decision and told them no, I told them no 3 times. I finally, they finally capitulated. And I told them, it's not no, it's just no for right now. The next 5 years, I got to be super dad. I got to be there for my kids. The amount of relief that I had just pour over me. And then as God's plan has it, another opportunity presented itself in town, and I'm in love with what I do right now. I joined a firm called Palmyra Capital, and I'm learning every day. I've got great partners in the business, and we're truly helping business owners solve the problem. And it's something that my mind works well on. And it was like God said, you've got these skills, you've got this challenge in your life where you can't travel and you need to have free time. Here it is. And it was just, Stacy, it was just amazing as how it was just served up to me.
Yeah, but if you had rushed and made a decision and got back in the game and all that other stuff, you just I
would have missed it.
Yeah, you sabotage your own. God's working in your life. I mean, certainly He would have turned that into good somehow too. But yeah, you gotta be patient. You gotta wait for God to give you His direction. And we can be impatient. I can be impatient the same way. It's like, hey, God, I'm ready for this or whatever. Come on, I'm just sitting here waiting. And,
and it, during that time, I had a lot of you came over and visited with me during that crucial time. And I had another guy that I deeply respect named Mac Ogren, who is the GM at JH Ranch, but he was also a CFO for a company that we all worked at.
And he was actually a guest on episode about 4 here.
That's right. And so Mac Ogren came into my life, and I called him. He was one of my first calls, and I just said, hey, look, here's the situation. I don't know what to do. He goes, you need to get the book Halftime and call this guy in charge of the Halftime Institute. And I just, as I was intentional every morning about my first thing I was going to do was to dive into the Word and just pray to God, hey, show me your path for my next life. God made it evidently clear, and I journaled that. I mean, I think journaling is so important because as God speaks to you in your conscience, or as you come to some revelation, that's just not your brain working. That is, if you're intentional about your walk and you're walking with, that's God giving you thoughts. And that's what I say when you change your perspective and your context of walking with God, those signs become evident. That's Him showing you a path. And I would journal those, and it became evident that He gave this 4-part process to my life to where I could, again, satiate that desire, that need to have my business mind churn, but also to put my kids in number one spot and to have my control of my calendar so I could drive carpool and I could go pick up from soccer practice and I could be there for my girls when they needed me to be there for homecoming and shop. Last week I went and shopped for dresses, and we did a runway here about 3:00 in the afternoon during the week. I couldn't have done that if I'd have been on that hamster wheel again.
A couple of times you mentioned to me that if you didn't believe in the spiritual life or heaven, that you had experiences that would that have shaped your thoughts on that.
Yeah.
Anything you can share on that?
Yeah, it's just, again, it's not like I don't hear voices, but there have been several instances, as people on the podcast can probably imagine, raising 3 teenagers now. My daughter, my oldest, is about to turn 19. She's going off to Auburn University next year, which is where I went to school, which will be fun for us as a family. My middle daughter now is 16 and is learning to drive, and my son is 13. So you can imagine life has a lot of challenges and curveballs with 3 teenagers and a single dad, a widowed dad at the house trying to help navigate it. And those challenges come with issues where a mom's voice should probably be the person talking to the kids. And there have been so many instances where before I have to talk to my daughters about a mean girl or a boyfriend or a relationship or something that happened at school, and I just say a quick little prayer, and it's like the words coming out of my mouth are not there. It's not my. There's no way I could have come up with what I said. And afterward, I'm like, wow, that was brilliant. I'm like, no, that's the Holy Spirit. That was Stacy coming through when I needed it most. But it's just as you walk through this journey of being without Stacy, she has shown up so many times and provided me guidance when I needed it most. And you're going to think this is weird, but when we had, I don't know, several hundred people come to her funeral, and then after the funeral, we went to the reception, and what I did not think about, I didn't consider, is there was going to be this receiving line, and the line was very long, and I didn't really get to hang out with everybody that was there. I was just, shaking hands with one person at a time, and, they were telling me about their favorite memory of Stacy. It was beautiful. It was endearing. But I had 3 people come to me that didn't know each other and had lost a spouse or had lost a loved one, and they said, have you seen the Cardinals yet or heard the Birds? And I was like, that's weird, because we had the Birds when Stacy passed, and I didn't think about the Cardinals. But since then, it's like when I do something that is out of the norm for my kids, that is beyond what I should do for the kids, or that, even as a dad, I look back and go, wow, that was pretty cool. I did that. A cardinal will show up and just, one day it almost flew into my car. But again, it's those little signs and things that normally you would miss it, but when you're walking with God, those signs become just a part of your experience, and they show you that Stacy's still there. And when I'm late at night trying to solve a problem that's going on with the kids, I mean, the things that come through my head are definitely her voice, definitely without a doubt. And we all feel her presence here in the house still. She's here, and she, there was something that happened with my daughter recently, and she said, I woke up and I was with her. We were on a trip, and I was with her. I was in a different room, and we had a meeting, and I was telling them how I felt about what the situation, and the words that came out of my mouth were not mine. They were Stacy's for sure. And my daughter said, that's really weird you said that. I was like, why? She said, last night I felt Mommy's presence in our room, and I actually saw something that looked like, and I just didn't want to see it, and I turned around and went to sleep again. And so there's people are going to think I'm kooky by saying that, but that's real, and it just makes you realize that heaven is real. And another thing is, these divorcees, or these widowers and widows came up to me and said, Stacy will be there with you throughout your house and throughout your next steps. And, it's given me a lot of comfort, and it's why, quite frankly, you and I went in the closet a second ago. All her clothes are in her closet 3 years later, just like they were the day she died. Our bathroom is set up the same way, with her vanity and her makeup and everything in mind. And I just see no desire to change that right now, because she's here and I can feel her every day.
I don't know what to say to that. That's powerful. I think you're still in love with her.
No doubt. I still, wear my wedding ring. I get friends who come up to me and, they want me to date. I have no desire right now and to date. I don't know if I ever will. I'm still married to her. I'm still in a deep relationship with her. We talk every day. Probably we talk a lot more now than when I did when I was traveling around trying to set the world on fire.
Yeah.
And she's always there, which is really, really cool. And until you've had, those of you who've lost someone and you're in a deep faith relationship, you'll get this. If you're not, I would invite you to start on that journey, because it is so cool when you can experience somebody's love from heaven, even though they're gone, and they're still there. They're still guiding you. They're still talking to you. And, until you surrender and have that deep abiding relationship, you don't feel it. I don't think I've talked to people who they just think, I lost my wife or lost my friend. I don't feel that. But if you have that deeper abiding relationship, and you're walking with God, you feel it, and it's ever present. It's really, really cool. The way I look at it is she's kind of an angel. And matter of fact, we just had a friend in our close community, Jim Thanner, whose daughter's Nev, went in for surgery for a brain tumor, and it was benign, thank God. But I told him, I said, I'm lending you my angel for the week while you're in surgery. And I really believe that, like, God is, I have a relationship with God. I talk to him all the time. But Stacy is like this angel who is here with us. Does that make sense?
It does.
And so she, when things get out of whack, it's like that's where her presence gets made known more. And it's like, little bitty, it's not big things, it's little bitty things. It's like when something doesn't go the way I want it to, I like to keep kind of, I wasn't all this way. Back in college, my house was in a state of disarray, but now I like my house being in order, having a schedule, all that kind of stuff. And so when things uproot that, and having 3 teenagers, that happens quite frequently, I will get upset and I'll yell at the kids, or I'll raise my voice, or say something I shouldn't have. And then I get this tug by Stacy to say, hey, go back in your daughter's room and apologize, and say that wasn't intended, and here's what I mean, and do we understand each other? And beforehand, I would have just harbored that, gone on to the next day, and then look at her at breakfast the next day. Hey, we good? That kind of thing. And so it's just little things like that where she's leading me as my angel. But on a day-to-day basis, I think maybe it's my relationship with God is just about him showing me my life purpose, and he's more strategy. Maybe she's execution as my angel. Does that make sense? But God is the one I lean on to in my quiet time and throughout the day. And anytime I need something, I'm about to go sit down with my daughter for a deep conversation about something that's going on. Hey, God, I want your will to be done right now. I don't know how to have this conversation. Can you just be with me and give me the right things to say? And it's amazing how he does. And then I'll say, Stacy, I want your words to come out as well.
Yeah.
So it's a combo. It's a combo between the two, with God having 99% of the weight.
What's your message?
Wow. I would say that my message would be that I think everybody thinks that to be a Christian and to be a follower of God, you go from being this person who is not a Christian, godly person, and then all of a sudden lightning strikes and you decide, I'm giving it all up, and you get dunked, and then you're this pious person that's just singing church music all day long. And my message is that is not it at all. God wants a relationship. And if you ever had a relationship, a dating relationship, a friend relationship, it's beautiful and it's awesome. And it starts out kind of, as this new thing. And the more you get to know this person, you more think, well, I don't like that about them. I want more of this. And the relationship takes flight, and there are setbacks, and there are tough conversations, and there are times when you think that friend has let you down, and that journey that you go on, you don't have to accept Christ and be dunked. Just take that first step. Take one step, put one foot in front of the other, and when you don't have all the answers, surrender a little bit more, and one day you'll say, you know what? I'm going to surrender it all. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not there yet. I haven't surrendered it all. I'd be lying to you if I told you that. But I surrender a whole lot more than I did a decade ago. And that surrender is getting more and more real every day. And I can tell you, the more surrender I have, the more joy I have in my life. And now I'm actually, I mean, who would have thought the guy 10 years ago would actually be in part of a ministry? I'm a part of a ministry that had 46 people decide that they wanted to do a daily abiding with God last weekend, and 13 people made a decision to follow God. And that's just mind-boggling to me. And so the more you surrender, make yourself available, dive in, just put one faith step ahead of the other. It doesn't have to be a huge leap. And you're going to go backwards. You're going to fall. You're going to say, there are times you're going to question your faith. That's normal. You can be mad at God. That's normal too. It's just like you're mad at your worldly father, your biological father. You can be mad at your heavenly father as well. It's a relationship. And the more you develop that relationship, the easier life gets, the more peace you have, and the more life starts coming to you and becomes more apparent. And God's number one objective is for us to help us to have a relationship with Him, but also to understand what His purpose is for our life. And what I've learned in my 54 years is that God has bigger plans for us in His plan for our life than we could ever dream for ourselves. And, if you think that we're on this mud ball called Earth and there's nothing else, as you look up in the stars and there's this huge galaxy, and there's just more to life than these 80 some odd years we spend on this mud ball. There's things that are going to be, Stacy's doing things that I'll experience one day, but there's just a different realm, if you will, that God lives on that we will never understand until we die and go and have accepted Christ as our Savior and go to join Him. And that's exciting. It's like you said, the journey in surrendering provides a lot of excitement. I have no idea where this continued surrender is going to go, but it's exciting. And it's tough when you're the guy 10 years ago who thinks he's got it all under control and has all the answers. That surrendering was crippling to think about. And it took me 10 years to get there. So little baby steps, fallbacks, baby steps up, fallbacks, baby steps up, until you get to that point where you feel comfortable surrendering and saying, God, I don't have all the answers. Show me your plan for my life. And that gets exciting.
Mark Kessler, one of my best friends in the world, and this conversation has been really powerful, and I dig hearing your insights. I cry with you when you relive your pain, and these are people that I love too. But it was your wife, and it was your baby, and it was your dad, and I just appreciate you sharing that.
Well, thanks for having me on. I hope that, I don't know what this serves as for everybody that's listening, but I'm transparent, and in anything that I can say to help people on their journey, I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, we're all called to evangelize and to make disciples of others, and God gives us the experiences of our lives, in our lives, to shape us in our own faith, but also to use as a tool to reach out and affect others. And your story is that, and you have committed yourself to using the experiences of your dad's memory, Stacy's memory, and all the things that have happened in your life to affect other people toward Christ. And so that's you answering that call.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted one other thing before we close is, I don't want people to think that I'm this biblical scholar. I mean, I haven't read the entire Bible. I'm not one of those guys who can recite verses at will and remember verses. I'm 54 years old, and my walk with God is evolving every day. And, the fact that I'm sitting here on a faith-based podcast 10 years from where I was is just, mind-boggling. And, but I'm not this perfect person. I've got I'm far from it. I've got a lot of issues, and I'm just a normal Joe who's sitting here on a podcast talking about my faith journey, which is wild in and of itself, and is part of God's plan for my life. And making your mess your message. Everybody's got a messy life, or making your mess your ministry is a very powerful statement. And if it can help somebody, I'm glad to be here and doing that.
Thank you for having us here, and I love you, brother.
Love you too, man.
It's just starting for you. You know that, right?
I do. And you look better with longer hair, by the way.
Cut.
Brent.
Coming to know what it means to truly give our life to God and trust Him with direction is a challenge we all face. It's hard, but those who have stepped out of that boat will all tell you that it's more than worth it. Though Mark's path is uniquely his, I know there are parts of it that resonate with each of us. Know that you're loved. You're not alone. And as Mark said, just take even a small step of faith toward the author of life. It's the only home of true inner peace and joy, no matter the circumstance. Thank you for joining us today on A Stronger Faith. If you want to help us, you can pray that God continues to use these conversations to draw more people to Himself. You can also point us to people you may know who have faith-shaping experiences that should be shared by sending an email to connect@astrongerfaith.com or with a message on Facebook or Instagram. Until next time, we pray for peace and a stronger faith for you and those you love.